I walked in, set my keys on the table, and knew right away something was off. The place was too still, like when the power goes out and every little tick and click stops. My watch said it was barely past 4 in the afternoon. I usually wasn't home until closer to 6, sometimes 7. But there'd been a power outage at the plant, so they cut us loose early. I glanced around the hallway. Her jacket hung on the hook by the door, the same one she wore that morning. Beside it, the shoes she liked to keep neat, toes pointing out like she expected a military inspection. And in the corner, my daughter's school bag slumped against the wall. That meant my wife was home, and Lisa was somewhere inside too. Normally I'd holler a hey, to let them know I was back, but I didn't. Something kept me quiet, maybe the hush in the air or just a small knot in my stomach. I stood there with my work boots still on, hands in my pockets, listening. The living room was empty. Lights off. I caught a faint murmur from upstairs, but at first it didn't even sound like voices, more like movement. Or maybe I imagined it. I wandered through the kitchen, saw an unwashed mug in the sink, a plate with crumbs on the counter. Light spilled through the windows, dust swirling around in slow circles. Outside, the neighborhood looked normal. Kids' bikes thrown on lawns, a dog or two barking down the block. All the usual stuff. Then I heard something upstairs again. The hallway above me, or maybe the bedroom. I hesitated at the foot of the stairs, hand on the railing. My heart wasn't racing, but there was a cold weight inside me, like a warning. I've lived long enough to trust those feelings. I wasn't the type to sneak around my own house, but that day, I stepped slow, trying not to make the wood creak. I don't know if I expected anything in particular. Maybe I thought Lisa was sick, or my wife was lying down with her, reading, or who knows. The bedroom door was open a crack. It shouldn't have been. That was the first real jolt in my gut. We always kept it closed, whether we were in there or not. I can still see that slice of light on the hallway carpet, the way my own shadow cut into it when I moved. I caught a glimpse, her hair, the pale gold of it, moving. My wife's hair. At first, my mind wouldn't piece it together. It was like watching a scene in a muted movie, no sound. He was on his back, and she was straddling him, leaning forward, her hair falling over his face. I recognized him a split second later, the English teacher from Lisa's high school. He looked mid-20s, maybe older, but next to my wife, it was noticeable how young he was. I stood there, feeling my chest tighten. It wasn't anger at first. It was more like disbelief, or that sense of, this can't be real. Everything slowed down. I remember the dust in the hallway, how the air smelled stale, how my own body felt too heavy to move. Then the floorboard under me squeaked. She twisted around, eyes going wide, and she made this muffled cry, half gasp, half scream. He shoved her off, like she was some shield he needed to toss aside, and he scrambled for his pants. I didn't say anything. Couldn't. My throat locked. Instead, I walked backward out of that doorway and forced myself down the stairs. My legs were stiff, but they worked on autopilot, each step careful, like I was making sure not to slip. When I reached the garage, I stood in the dim light, the overhead bulb still flickering, probably from the power surge earlier. I spotted a bucket of gray paint left over from when we patched up the fence last year. I grabbed it without really thinking. Or maybe I was thinking too clearly, I don't know. My mind felt hot, yet it all made sense to me in a second. Take the paint, walk outside. His car, a silver Honda parked halfway up my driveway, faced the road. He always showed up in that thing, teacher's lot or after school meetings, who knows. It made me sick to see it there. I popped the lid. My hand shook, but I didn't spill. I hefted the bucket and poured the entire thing over his windshield and hood, a slow, thick wave that covered the glass, the wipers, the mirror. Some splashed on the ground. When the bucket ran empty, I set it down on the grass, right by the front tire. Then I stepped back to look at it, paint dripping off the edges. It reminded me of a fresh coat on a dull old bench, like I was doing some home project. Only this was personal, an insult marking his car for what it was, not welcome. He must have heard the motion, or maybe my wife screamed at him to check. He came bolting out the front door wearing only his socks, still fumbling to button his jeans. His hair was a mess, sweat on his forehead. He looked at the car, at me, at the bucket. I just stood there, arms crossed. He stammered something, but I didn't catch it. I saw his lips move, but it was like I'd gone deaf. He seemed scared, like he expected me to grab a crowbar and smash his headlights. Instead, I glared at him. Not a single word left my mouth for a moment. I just wanted him to feel how small he was, how irrelevant. Then I told him, plain and quiet, "You're not the first. You're just the last." He opened and shut his mouth like a fish out of water. Maybe he wanted to defend himself. Maybe he wanted to say something about how it was a mistake, an accident. I didn't let him. I turned and went back inside, ignoring the paint still dripping off his car. The front door shut behind me with a click, and in the sudden hush, I heard him cussing under his breath, like he had no idea what to do. Inside, my wife stood in the living room in a bathrobe, hair all tangled, tears on her cheeks. She looked at me, wanting an explanation or a fight or maybe to beg. I don't know. I walked right by her, not a glance. I headed to the bathroom, turned on the faucet, and washed my hands, scrubbing my palms until the gray paint flecks ran off. I kept my eyes on the water spiraling down the drain. My chest felt tight, like a coil was wound up inside me, but I wasn't trembling. My mind was oddly clear. The only thought in my head was, "So that's how it is." I didn't say anything to her when I came out. She tried to speak, but her voice shook. Something about, "It's not what you think," or, "We can talk." I told her, "No. Not now." Then I left her standing there, barefoot on the rug, while I went into the spare room and shut the door. I heard her walk around for a while. Maybe she tried to phone someone. Maybe she was pacing, figuring out how to explain this to Lisa. I didn't care. I lay on the old twin bed we kept for guests, stared at the ceiling fan, and let my mind drift. I could still feel that shock in my spine, that numb ache in my chest. Sometime later, maybe an hour or maybe less, I heard the Honda drive away, engine grunting, tires crunching over the driveway. I got up, looked out the window, and saw a smear of paint on the pavement, a trail that followed him out. It felt like a line had been drawn in the sand. There was no going back after that. Nothing about this was going to be the same. I listened for Lisa. Maybe she was hiding in her room with headphones on, or maybe she'd stepped out. I realized I didn't even know for sure if she'd heard it all. The house was quiet again, too quiet, but now it felt heavy, like the place was carrying a big secret it didn't want to keep. That night, I slept on that spare bed. Or tried to. My wife didn't knock, didn't speak. Maybe she was in our room, alone, feeling whatever guilt or panic she felt. I just lay there, my arm over my face, thinking about how everything can change in seconds. It's not a big dramatic show. It's quick, sharp, and then it's done. And you're left wondering why you didn't see it coming. I'd like to say I felt heartbreak or sorrow or rage. But mostly, it was an emptiness. Like I'd been hollowed out, replaced by a man going through the motions, go to bed, stare at the ceiling, get up, make coffee. A part of me thought, "We'll talk in the morning, or we'll fight, or something." But another part already knew, this was the end of the road for us. A final straw. I wasn't going to fight for her or cry over her. I was just done. I closed my eyes at some point, but I doubt I slept more than an hour. My mind kept looping that image of her hair falling over his face, him reaching for his pants, the silent horror of it. When the sun came up, I sat up on the edge of the bed and felt old, older than my years, older than I should. I remember thinking, "I'm 50, or close enough. Is this how it goes?" That morning, we didn't say a word. She was in the kitchen. I could smell coffee. I grabbed my keys from the table and walked out the door. We had nothing to talk about. Not yet. The next day I took off work. Called in, said I had a family issue. My boss didn't pry. He just told me to do what I needed to do, I sat in my truck a long time outside the hardware store. I'd gone there thinking maybe I'd buy something to fix up around the house, keep my hands busy, but I never even got out of the truck. I watched people go in and out, normal folks with errands and to-do lists, living their lives. I felt like an alien sitting there. After about an hour, I drove back home. Her car was in the driveway, so I knew she was there. I also spotted Lisa's car next to it, which meant my daughter was home too. My chest got tight again. I stood on the front step, listening. No voices inside. The air smelled like the neighbor's freshly cut grass. It all felt surreal, like the world was continuing on its normal route, but I was stuck in a slow-motion replay of yesterday. I opened the door. The house was quiet. Same hush, except now it felt suffocating. I saw some of her things piled near the couch. She must have packed or started to. A couple boxes, a suitcase, and random clothes on hangers. But she hadn't actually removed anything from the house yet. It was more like a half-finished thought. I found her in the living room, sitting on the edge of the sofa, phone in hand. She looked up at me, and it was like she had 1,000 words ready but couldn't form one. I nodded, more to myself than to her, and just said, "Where's Lisa?" "In her room," she answered softly. I leaned against the wall, arms crossed over my chest. "Did she see anything?" She shook her head. "No. I told her we had an argument." She looked like she wanted to say more, but I guess she couldn't figure out what. Maybe she realized there was no point. The truth would come out eventually, or maybe it wouldn't. But the shame was there. I saw it in her eyes, how she wouldn't meet mine. I didn't ask how she felt. I didn't ask about the teacher, or whether she'd been seeing him for days, weeks, months. At that point, the timeline almost didn't matter. A betrayal is a betrayal. I walked past her, into the kitchen, grabbed a trash bag from under the sink, the big black kind. And I walked upstairs. I don't know if she followed me. I didn't check. Lisa's door was closed. I stood there, heard her music playing softly. I almost knocked, but something stopped me. What would I say? I couldn't pretend this was a normal day. Yet I also couldn't bring myself to drag her into it. So I left her alone. I went to the master bedroom. My wife's closet was half empty. She'd taken some clothes out, but a bunch still hung in place. Her perfumes on the dresser, her jewelry box, all that stuff. I started pulling it down, piece by piece, and dropping it into the trash bag. No ceremony, no folding. Just raw, mechanical motions. Some clothes hung on the hangers, some fell off. I stuffed them all in. It felt better than I'd like to admit. I was calm, but it was the kind of calm that sets in after a decision is made. Downstairs, I heard the front door open, then shut. She must have stepped out to the porch. Maybe she was calling a friend, or maybe she just needed air. Didn't matter to me. By the time I was done, I had 2 bags full. Not suitcases, those felt too neat, too polite. Trash bags suited my mood. I dragged them down the stairs, one in each hand, and laid them out on the front porch, right on the wooden slats. She stood off to the side, arms folded, looking at me with a weird mix of fear and resignation. I knocked on the door frame. Not on the door itself, because I was already outside. Lisa peeked around the corner, curious. She saw the bags, saw me, saw her mom. I said, "Your mom's leaving for a while, Lisa." A flicker of confusion crossed her face. "What? Why?" Her eyes darted to her mom, then to me, back again. I didn't elaborate. I just said, "She's going to stay somewhere else." Then I glanced at my wife. She looked ready to burst into tears, but she kept it together. She didn't defend herself or ask me to stop. She seemed to accept it. Lisa started to say something, but I cut her off gently. "It's okay, kiddo. We'll talk later. I promise." My wife's voice cracked. "Lisa, honey." But Lisa turned away, stepping back into the house. She knew something was very wrong, and she also knew I wasn't budging. The tension weighed on all of us. I listened to Lisa's footsteps retreat down the hallway. Then I picked up the trash bags again, stepped off the porch, and set them at the edge of the walkway, where we usually put the garbage cans. The message was clear: this is what I think of your excuses. My wife followed me. She didn't plead. She didn't fight. It was like she'd given up. Or maybe she was ashamed to the point she couldn't muster a defense. The teacher's face flashed through my mind, and I felt a sick churn in my stomach. But I stayed outwardly calm, that same blank quiet in my head. I said, "You can grab them if you want. Call a cab or something. I don't care." She swallowed. "You're not even gonna let me." I cut her off. "Don't make me get the rest of your stuff." "Because I will." She pressed her lips together, tears in her eyes. But she nodded. "I'll call someone." I stood there for a second, watching her. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd say something else. Something about how I was disappointed, how I felt betrayed. But I didn't. It felt pointless. Instead, I turned away and headed to the garage. I heard her say my name once softly, but I didn't stop. The big garage door was open. I walked inside, rummaged around the shelves until I found an old box of stuff I'd been meaning to sort through for years. Random tools, cables, photo albums we never opened. I just needed something to do with my hands, somewhere to put my thoughts so they wouldn't burst out of me like a shout. That's when I stumbled on a dusty folder. It was tucked under some old car manuals. Inside were a few drawings Lisa made back when she was little: crayon flowers, stick figures, the typical stuff. A hospital bracelet from the day she was born, with her tiny name tag. The memories hit me all at once. How small she was. How proud I felt when I first held her. My eyes burned. I traced the letters of her name, typed on that plastic band. That's when I spotted 2 folded papers. They looked yellowed, old. I opened them. My hands started shaking, though I wasn't sure why. They were DNA tests. Dated soon after Lisa's birth. One was mine. One belonged to another man. I recognized the name, a friend from long ago, someone I vaguely recalled my wife spending time with before Lisa was born. The results were there in black and white, though the print was faded. One test matching paternity. The other not. And the one that matched wasn't mine. My breath caught in my throat. I tried to recall if I'd done these tests myself. The memory was fuzzy. Maybe I'd been suspicious back then, or maybe it was some hospital thing. I truly couldn't remember. But I must have shoved them in this folder and forgotten. Or maybe I never even saw the final results. That part's a blur. I stared at the documents, feeling like the floor dropped from under me. Down the driveway, a car pulled up. Probably her ride. I heard murmuring, footsteps on gravel, the trunk popping open. I guess she was loading those trash bags, maybe a suitcase or 2. My eyes stayed on those test papers. Suddenly, I understood a deeper betrayal. Lisa wasn't biologically mine. Another man fathered her. And it hit me like a sledgehammer that I'd been living in someone else's story all these years. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I just stood there, fists clenched, the folder still open on the hood of my old workbench. Everything felt surreal, like I was reading a script for a bad TV show. But it was my life. My daughter. And now I discovered, in black and white, that all those birthdays, all the bedtime stories, all the times she looked at me with that spark of trust, she wasn't mine by blood. That evening, I sat outside on the back porch with Lisa. The porch light was off, so we had the soft glow of the neighbor's floodlights spilling over the fence. Lisa had a mug of tea or hot chocolate, I'm not sure which. She held it between both hands, the way she always does, like she's trying to soak up the warmth. I was next to her, arms resting on my knees, eyes on the dark shape of the yard. It was peaceful in a fake sort of way. Neither of us spoke about the morning. Neither of us mentioned the trash bags, her mom leaving, or the reason why. It hung there in the quiet, heavy as a storm cloud. But I couldn't bring myself to break that silence. The flicker of guilt and anger in my chest made me want to lash out. But at who? Lisa had no part in this. She was just as blindsided. At least that's what I told myself, ignoring the torn-up pieces of paper in the garage that said otherwise. I thought about telling her right then, the whole truth. How her mom had been lying for years, how I'd found out. But I looked at her, the shape of her face, the slope of her nose, and all I saw was the little girl who once climbed into my lap on this very porch, telling me about her day in kindergarten. That memory cramped my heart. She was still my kid, no matter what the test said. I couldn't crush her with that. Not yet. So I kept quiet. She sipped her drink, eyes on the stars. After a while, she asked softly, "Dad, are you okay?" I almost laughed. Of course I wasn't. But she sounded small, worried. I nodded anyway and said, "I'll live." Because what else could I say? She looked down at the mug. Mom wouldn't tell me anything. She just said, "We had a falling out." A falling out? I repeated, and a bitter chuckle escaped my throat. That was one way to put it, I guess. Lisa hesitated. "I don't want you two to split up." Her voice was trembling a little. "But I'm not sure what to do." "Not your job to fix it," I said. And that was true. This was between me and her mother. I reached over, gave her shoulder a squeeze, a gesture I'd done countless times. "You focus on school. On yourself?" She nodded, eyes brimming with tears. She tried to blink away. "I hate this," she whispered. "Me too," I admitted. It was the closest I came to talking about it that night. We sat a while longer until her drink was cold, and then she went in. I stayed there, listening to the crickets, staring at the empty sky. Inside me, questions buzzed. How many times had my wife lied? How many flings had she had, going back to that old friend who turned out to be Lisa's real father? And how blind was I, not to see any of it? That swirl of thoughts kept me awake most of the night. The next morning, I decided enough was enough. I wrote my wife a text. Something short, just a single sentence. "You tell her the truth. Tomorrow. Or I will." I hit send before I could second-guess it. Then I turned off my phone. Maybe it was cowardly to do it by text, but I couldn't face her voice right then. I left the house before Lisa woke up, drove around for a couple hours, ended up near a diner on the edge of town. I ordered coffee, stared out the window at a highway that never seemed to end. The waitress came by a few times, asked if I needed anything else. I mumbled a "No, thanks," and tried to piece together what my next move was. My entire marriage was gone. The woman I'd spent so many years with wasn't who I thought she was. And the daughter I raised might not be mine on paper, but in every other way, she was. Around noon, I finally clicked my phone on. There was a text from my wife. "We're going. Don't do anything stupid." Just that. "We're going." I assumed she meant her and Lisa. My stomach went cold. I tossed a few bills on the table and rushed home. By the time I got there, both their cars were gone. The house felt hollow, the same hush as before. I walked through every room, expecting to see Lisa's bed stripped or something dramatic. But it looked normal, like they just stepped out for groceries. I checked Lisa's room. Her things were gone, some clothes, her school books. Not everything, but enough to show she packed in a hurry. It hit me that they'd left together. I stood there, feeling the old anger boil up. I told her to tell Lisa the truth, not to yank her away from me. But I guess she took it as a threat. Maybe she panicked and told Lisa some partial story, maybe that I was being irrational, or that we needed a cooling-off period. I had no clue. I texted Lisa, "Call me." No reply. I tried calling her phone, straight to voicemail. I hated that feeling of helplessness, the sense that I'd lost control of my own home and family in the blink of an eye. That day crawled by. I paced the floors, switched the TV on, turned it off again. I tried sorting old bills, tried sweeping the back porch. My mind wouldn't settle. She took Lisa. Or maybe Lisa went willingly, not wanting to be in the house with me. The coil in my chest wound tighter until I thought I'd snap. Finally, late that night, my phone buzzed. A text from Lisa. I love you, Dad. Mom said we need to stay with Aunt Mary. I'll talk to you soon. Please don't worry. I must have read it 10 times. So it wasn't the teacher. It was her sister's place. At least that was some relief. But I knew my wife was stalling. She didn't want me blurting out that secret. She'd do everything to keep Lisa from hearing it, or at least to buy time. But I'd made my decision. Lisa deserved to know. Even if it ripped her world apart. Because what would be worse, finding out from me, or finding out on her own, years from now, that I kept my mouth shut? I let a few days pass. Gave them space. Tried calling Lisa, but she always said she was busy, or Mom's calling me, or something else. The conversations were short, awkward. She sounded like she was stuck in the middle, which of course she was. I could sense she had no clue about the real reason behind all this. The teacher, the affair, the DNA. She didn't ask, and I didn't push. But inside, I was a storm of emotions, half-formed plans, and this cold sense of betrayal that refused to leave me alone. Then I remembered something else, that teacher, the English guy. He had a wife, a couple kids. I'd heard my wife mention it once in passing, how he wore a ring, talked about his little ones. And now I was thinking about how he not only wrecked my life, but probably had a family of his own. It lit a fuse in my mind. I wondered, should I just let his wife know? Does she deserve to see what he's been up to? The part of me that wanted payback felt it was the right call. But another part whispered, you're only doing that to hurt him. It won't fix your own mess. Days went by. I thought about it constantly. I even looked up his address in the school directory. That's how close I was to following through with the plan, but I hesitated. I kept asking myself if it was the right thing to do or just petty revenge. And I wasn't sure. In the meantime, my wife, ex-wife-to-be, I guess, sent me a text about, we need to talk soon. But she never said about what, exactly. I could guess, money, splitting assets, telling Lisa partial truths. She wanted to control the narrative. I wanted no part of that. The only thing I cared about was Lisa. I wanted her back home. Or at least, I wanted her to know the real story. I sat at the kitchen table in a half-empty house, staring at the phone. It was late, maybe 10 or 11 at night. The overhead light in the kitchen cast long shadows across the floor. I'd barely eaten. The TV mumbled in the background in the living room, some rerun I wasn't paying attention to. I was thinking about Lisa, picturing her reading a book at her aunt's place, or maybe trying to sleep, confused and hurt. Over and over, I turned the same thought in my head. She has to know the truth. That single line hammered at my skull. I texted my wife again. If you don't tell her tomorrow, I will. No reply. I guess she was already asleep or ignoring me. I could have driven over there, banged on the door, forced a conversation. But that felt wrong. Lisa wasn't a little kid, but she was still living under her mom's wing. I didn't want to traumatize her more than necessary. So I sat there, phone in hand, the clock ticking on the wall. Next morning, no message came. No call. I waited until noon, then I got in my truck, deciding I'd do it my way. On the drive over, my mind flipped through scenarios of how she might react, whether Lisa would cry or scream, whether she'd accuse me of lying. My throat felt like sandpaper, and my hands were sweaty on the wheel. I almost turned back twice. But I kept going. When I pulled into Aunt Mary's cul-de-sac, I saw Lisa's car out front. My wife's was there too. A few kids played on the sidewalk with bikes. Normal day in a normal neighborhood. I parked, turned off the ignition, and just sat. Then I saw movement at the window. My wife's face, half hidden by the curtain. She saw me, but she didn't come out. That told me everything. She wasn't planning to have a calm conversation. She'd probably tried to keep Lisa away or hush me somehow. But I got out and walked up to the door, rang the bell. Lisa answered. She looked pale, eyes puffy. She must have known something serious was happening. I said, "Hey, can we talk?" She glanced over her shoulder at her mom, who was standing in the living room, arms folded. I didn't wait for permission. I stepped inside. Aunt Mary was nowhere in sight, maybe out on errands. My wife started to speak, but I put up a hand. Let me talk to Lisa. Alone. Lisa hesitated. Mom? She shook her head, tears forming. He's going to. I cut her off. I'm going to tell her the truth. That's all. My wife's eyes darted from me to Lisa. Then she stepped back, her hands shaking. Lisa looked scared, but she followed me into the spare bedroom. I closed the door. We sat on the edge of a bed that smelled like detergent and lavender. For a moment, I couldn't find the words. Then I forced them out. I caught your mom with someone. He's your English teacher. That's why she left the house. That's why I put her stuff out on the porch. I'm not proud of how it happened, but I can't pretend it didn't. Lisa's face went slack, her mouth slightly open. What? She whispered. Mister, are you serious? I nodded. Yeah. I walked in on them. I'm sorry you have to hear it like this, but I won't lie to you. Her eyes brimmed with tears, but she didn't sob. She just stared at the wall, blinking rapidly. I had no idea. He always seemed normal at school. A wave of guilt swept through me. I knew I was about to drop the second bomb. And that was the bigger one. I cleared my throat, voice trembling. Lisa, there's more. I found something in the garage. Old paperwork. DNA tests from right after you were born. Her head jerked, confusion sharpening in her eyes. She started to say something, but I pushed on. I'm your dad, Lisa. But not by blood. It's in the papers. Another man was your biological father. Someone your mom was involved with before you were born. She inhaled sharply, a sound that ripped me up inside. No. That can't be. I set a hand on her shoulder. I wish it wasn't true. But I've got the documents. There's no point lying to you. I didn't know until a few days ago. She never told me. I guess she didn't want to lose us. Lisa's tears fell now, 2 silent streams down her cheeks. Her voice shook. But we have the same eyes, the same laugh. She sounded desperate, like she was clinging to something. I squeezed her shoulder. We share a lot, kiddo. Doesn't matter what the paper says. I raised you. I changed your diapers. I taught you how to ride a bike. Nothing will change that. Her sob escaped, and she pressed her face into her hands. I pulled her to me, my arms tight around her. She cried in rough, ragged gasps, like her world was falling apart under her feet. I felt my own eyes burning, but I kept it in. I needed to be steady, to hold her up. We sat like that for a long time. Eventually, she pulled away, wiping her face with her sleeves. She asked in a trembling voice, So, that's why Mom left? Because you found out? I nodded. Part of it. She was seeing that teacher, yes, but also she knew I discovered the truth about you. I told her she had to explain. She decided to grab you and go before I could. I'm sorry. She looked toward the door, probably thinking about her mom on the other side. Then she looked back at me. I don't care about some DNA test, she managed. You're my dad. You'll always be my dad. I exhaled, relief and heartbreak mixing in a single breath. Thank you, I said softly, because I couldn't find bigger words. Then I added, But I didn't want you living in the dark. Not about the affair, not about this. You deserve the truth. She nodded, eyes red and raw. What now? She asked. That was the question, wasn't it? I shook my head. I don't know. You're 18 now, or close enough. You can decide where you want to stay, how you want to handle this. I won't force you to come home if you need space. But the door's always open. She swallowed hard. I think I need some time. I understood that. You take all the time you need. Just know I'm there for you, always. Outside, I heard her mom pacing. Probably listening through the thin walls, or at least guessing what was being said. I didn't want a blow-up scene. This was about Lisa, not a screaming match. So I stood, opened the door, and found my wife standing in the hallway, tears streaking her face. She tried to speak, but Lisa brushed past her and disappeared into the bathroom. The door shut. A moment later the lock clicked. My wife looked at me, voice shaking. "You told her." "She deserved to know," I said bluntly. She half sobbed, half hissed. "You couldn't let me do it in my own way, my own time?" "No," I said. "Because your way was to run." She lifted her hand, like she might strike me or push me, but it just hovered there. Then she deflated, hugging herself. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry." I couldn't tell if she meant about the affair, the lie about Lisa, or everything combined. Maybe all of it. Maybe none of it. I walked out without another word, leaving her in that hallway, hugging her arms like a scared kid. My truck was still parked out front. The kids on bikes stared at me curiously as I climbed in. My hands were shaking on the wheel. I felt no triumph. No satisfaction. Just a deep exhaustion, like I'd walked 100 miles with a weight on my back. I drove home in silence. The day was bright, but to me it looked washed out. Once inside, I kicked off my boots, turned on the TV for noise, and sank onto the couch. I stared at the ceiling, replaying Lisa's tears, the shock on her face. Telling her the truth might have been the right thing to do, but it hurt like hell. I tried calling her later that evening. No answer. I guessed she was done talking for a while. I sat there, phone in hand, wishing I could roll back time. Wishing I never found those tests in the garage, never walked in on that scene in my bedroom. But it was foolish. Life doesn't roll back. Once the secret is out, it's out, and there's no gluing it back together. A month passed. My wife, ex-wife, though the paperwork wasn't final yet, didn't come back. She stayed with her sister, as far as I knew. Lisa was back and forth. Sometimes she'd visit me, other times she'd stay with her mom. It was awkward, a half-broken family routine. She never asked for details about the teacher, never asked how I felt. She was quieter than usual. I tried not to push. I told her I was there if she needed to talk. But mostly, she just sat in silence, her eyes distant. Then one morning, I woke up and knew exactly what I had to do. I found that teacher's address from the school directory. I'd been keeping it in the back of my mind for weeks. So I printed out copies of the DNA tests, the old, faded ones that proved Lisa wasn't mine, plus the phone screenshot from the day I'd discovered the affair. I composed a short letter. "He's not just teaching your kids. He's making others into strangers." That's all I wrote. Maybe it was petty. Maybe it was justified. I felt a cold satisfaction sealing that envelope, addressing it to his wife. I mailed it that same day. Dropped it into the blue mailbox outside the post office, no return address. I told myself I was just being honest, letting her know who she was dealing with. But deep down, I knew it was also a final punch, a last strike to make sure he felt what I felt, betrayal. Let her figure out what to do with that information. Maybe she'd forgive him, maybe she'd throw him out. That was her call. After that I waited. And nothing happened. No big confrontation at my door, no angry phone calls. I heard rumors the school quietly replaced him, some temporary leave that never ended. People assumed he'd messed up in some professional capacity. I guess word got around that he was involved with a parent. I didn't get the details, and I didn't care. That was the last I heard of him. Lisa never asked me about it. She didn't mention him, or if there'd been gossip at school. She was near graduation by then, so maybe she just kept her head down until it was over. She moved carefully around me, like I was a wounded animal that might lash out. We still had dinner together some nights. We'd watch TV. But there was a distance, a silence that wasn't there before. I knew I couldn't fix that overnight. Sometimes we'd laugh at something on the screen, and for a moment, everything felt normal. Then the laughter would die, and the quiet would creep back in. Eventually, she graduated. I took her out for a small celebration, just the two of us. We went to this diner we used to like, had burgers and fries. I gave her a card with a check inside for college expenses. She smiled, a real smile. She hugged me. I realized that, no matter what the test said, she was still my daughter in every sense that mattered. She knew it, and I knew it. We didn't say the words, but it was there in how she leaned her head on my shoulder for a second, how I didn't pull away. Time passed. Life went on. My wife's name drifted off my everyday thoughts. There was a divorce, a splitting of assets. She got her own place. I stayed in the house. Lisa spent a couple years in college, changed her major once, and ended up living back home for a while. We never spoke about the teacher or the DNA again. I let it lie. She did too. And now, I'm 61, she's grown, and we share this house, just the two of us. She's got her own life, but we have a routine. She still holds her mug with both hands when she drinks coffee in the morning, staring out the window at the yard. Sometimes I watch her from the side, noticing little gestures she got from me, the way she tilts her head when she's thinking, the way she folds her laundry. Blood or not, she's my kid. Always will be. We don't talk about that day I poured paint on a Honda, or the trash bags I dragged onto the porch, or the way she found out the truth about her mom's lies. It's buried under the day-to-day flow of living. But every so often, late at night, I think back to that moment upstairs, seeing my wife with him. I still feel a twist of pain, but it's dulled with time. People ask sometimes if I'm lonely, living with just my daughter. I usually shrug and say, we do okay. Because we do. I'm not bitter. I'm just settled, I guess. Enough has happened. Enough damage has been done. I never told Lisa that I knew about the DNA for sure, that I read the results front to back. I mean, she knows I found the tests, but I've never spelled out all the details, never hammered home that the name on that test was definitely not me. She doesn't bring it up, I don't bring it up. It hangs there, but we leave it alone. Maybe that's our silent deal, we accept each other, no matter what the official record says. Sometimes I wonder about the real father, that old friend. I don't know if he even knows. Maybe he's out there living a normal life, unaware he's got a grown daughter. I guess it's not my place to open that door. Unless Lisa wants to. She hasn't shown any sign of wanting that. She's content calling me Dad, letting me fill that role. And I'm fine with it, more than fine. She's my girl. I think about the teacher from time to time. Wonder if his wife got my letter and confronted him, if his kids ever realized why their dad lost his job. But it doesn't keep me up at night. I did what I felt I had to do. Some people call it revenge. I call it making sure the truth didn't stay hidden. And maybe it was also a little payback. I'm not a saint. I won't lie. So that's it. That's the story. No big moral or life lesson to wrap it up, just what happened. I won't sugarcoat it and say I forgave everything. I didn't. And I won't pretend I'm noble. I did some stuff I'm not proud of, but I don't regret it, if that makes sense. When you see your marriage fall apart in front of your eyes, you do whatever you can to hold on to your dignity. I'll never forget the look on her face when I poured that paint on his car. And I'll never forget the way Lisa cried when I told her the truth. But I'm not haunted by it anymore. I've moved on. Life goes on, even after you think it can't. You find a new routine, you breathe in and out, and you learn to live with what's left. And Lisa? She's my daughter, always. Blood tests be damned. Sometimes, late at night, I'll see her reading on the couch, and I remember the first time she reached for my finger in the hospital, her tiny hand clutching it. That's all that matters. Even if on paper I'm not her father, in every way that counts, I am. And I don't need anyone else's approval for that. We have our quiet life now. It's not perfect, but it's real. And it's enough.